Hello, everybody, and welcome to Joule in Action, agentic AI that automates T&E from start to finish. My name is Haley Baslin Kwan. I'm a Senior Product Marketing Manager at SAP Concur, and I have been with the organization for just over 10 years. And I would like to introduce our co-pilot today, Malavika.
Hello everyone, I'm Malavika. I've also been with SAP for over 11 years. I lead the spend product management teams for Joule, Payments, and Concur Invoice. And today we're excited to share with you everything there is to share about Joule in SAP Concur.
Amazing. So today we are going to take you on a galactic journey. You just saw our opening crawl scene, which may have felt a bit familiar. But instead of rebels and empires, our story today is about something many of us are all too familiar: travel and expense. Battling receipts, coordinating travel, trying to keep things in policy. Joule and agentic AI can automate the entire travel and expense journey end to end. In other words, Joule is bringing balance to the T&E galaxy. So let's jump right in. Today, we will be going through an introduction into everything there is to know about Joule. We'll take you on a traveler journey from start to finish, from planning the trip to after the trip. Then I'll take us through the activation steps if you are interested in taking that next step in your journey with Joule. Then I'll pass it back to Malavika to take us through vision and roadmap, and we'll close out with a quick recap. So let's get started. Joule is SAP's AI solution that is embedded directly in SAP Concur Solutions. It uses generative AI and SAP's trusted data foundation to answer questions and automate routine tasks in travel and expense. And now Joule solutions can be used via the chat interface. So you'll see the image on our slide here. That's what that conversational layer looks like, where you can ask Joule questions directly. The other way that you might interact with Joule is through embedded solutions that are directly within Concur solutions like Concur Expense or Expenseit. So we will take you through a traveler journey, and you'll see examples of both of those. But ultimately, if you take one thing away from this presentation, I hope that you understand that this is AI not just for the sake of AI, but to truly deliver value for your organization. Whether it's driving faster work, smarter insights that are grounded in your business data, better outcomes, and always providing that human control so you decide when and where it works. Joule is there to deliver these amazing business outcomes. All right, so I'm going to take you through some of the base solutions. So with SAP Concur Solutions, you get Joule solutions available at no additional cost. There is activation required, and I will go into those steps later on in this presentation. But Joule is going to help deliver various use cases for your organization. The first being conversational help search. So I don't know if you've ever been to the SAP Help portal. If you have, you'll know that there is a ton of amazing information in there. But a ton is the key word there. Sometimes it's really hard to find the information that you're looking for. With conversational help search, you can just simply ask Joule questions about SAP Concur Solutions and get natural language answers back from Joule that help you understand how to use our solutions. Then we have expense transactions. And by that, I mean over 25 expense transactions that you would typically do within Concur Expense. For example, you can create reports, add items, do your itemizations, add attendees, and much more. The third is the booking agent. So this is relevant if you have Concur Travel. And the booking agent supports compliant travel booking. So rather than going into Concur Travel to book your trip, you could simply chat with the Joule interface and make your reservations through that channel. And then the final one that I'll highlight, and this one's very exciting because it's coming soon, is Policy Navigator. This works similarly to the conversational help search, but rather than it being SAP help documentation, it's your organization's unique travel and expense policy documentation. So how this will work is that your organization can upload your travel and expense policy documents, and then using generative AI, Joule is going to be able to answer any questions that your employees may have about your policy. So employees could ask questions like, am I supposed to purchase insurance with my rental car? Can I buy snacks from the minibar at the hotel? What's my daily rate? All of those questions, they can go right through Joule, ask the questions, and get answers back that are based on your company's policy. So those were the base solutions. Those are available, again, at no additional cost. We also have Joule Premium, and this is an advanced solution that unlocks further agentic AI capabilities. Now, as we go through our presentation, to help you understand if something is part of the base solution or the premium add-on solution, you'll see a little blue star in the corner of the screen. That will help you understand. If you see that, that means it's part of the premium solution. So the first agent in our premium solution that I would like to highlight is the Meeting Location Planner agent. And this helps answer the question of where should we meet? So maybe you manage an international team and you want to get everyone together for an on-site. What's the best location? What makes the most sense? What's the most cost-effective? The Meeting Location Planner agent can help answer those questions. And you'll see more information on all these agents later on as we go through the traveler journey. Then we have the Expense Report Validation agent. And this guides you through the expense report creation process. So you can make sure that everything looks good. If there's any errors, it's going to help flag that for you and help you resolve it. Maybe you have a missing receipt. The expense report validation agent can help take you through those final steps to make sure your expense report is good to go. And then the final one is the expense automation agent. And this is another one that is coming soon. This is going to automate the expense report process for you. It will help add reports or add expenses into the appropriate expense report, and it will automatically fill in details for you, such as business purpose, the report header, and even custom fields. So this is going to save your employees a ton of time without having to manually enter in their details. So as you can see from both the Joule Base and Joule Premium, we have new solutions coming soon. And so that's something that I want to call your attention to. We are continuing to add use cases to Joule. This is truly just the beginning, and we will continue to innovate and add to this solution moving forward. So with that, we want to take you through a traveler journey made possible by Joule, and I'm going to hand it over to Malavika to start.
Thank you, Haley. So as we go on this traveler journey, let's start at the very beginning of the journey, which is planning the trip. For years, business travel has required trade-offs: speed versus compliance, convenience versus control, employee experience versus policy enforcement. And what we're doing with Joule changes that dynamic entirely. With Joule, we are embedding intelligence directly into the flow of work, not as an afterthought, not as a chatbot on the side, but where work happens, so the whole journey feels effortless and seamless. Let's look at how we are embedding intelligence into the flow of work in the travel planning stage. Firstly, we have the Policy Navigator. One of the biggest friction points in travel is uncertainty. Am I allowed to book this? Will this be reimbursed? Joule answers those questions instantly, grounded in your company's specific policy. Just clarity, reinforcing compliance through understanding rather than restriction. Second, we have the booking agent. Travelers can book compliant trips easily with AI guidance built directly into the flow. Not adapting the trip for them, but helping them make the right decisions and choices the very first time. The result is less friction for employees, fewer policy violations, and better cost outcomes for the organization. And finally, we have the meeting location planner agent. Instead of someone manually pulling spreadsheets, comparing costs, and debating fairness across teams, we have Joule that looks at estimated travel costs, attendee locations, and proposes the optimal meeting location in seconds. This isn't just convenience. It's smarter cost governance right at the moment of planning. So we've talked about intelligence embedded in the planning process. Let us now look at that intelligence through the lens of someone that actually carries the weight of planning. Behind every successful offsite, every cross-regional leadership meeting, there's someone making it all happen. Meet the executive assistant, and let's hear what that really looks like.
Yes, hello, I'm back again, but this time in a new character, the interstellar executive operations assistant. I am responsible for supporting multiple executives, all of whom insist upon conducting offsite meetings at a frequency that is, I assure you, quite astonishing. This requires me to maintain numerous spreadsheets, carefully tracking attendees, locations, projected expenditures, and assorted budgetary variables, simply to preserve financial order. How can Joule help make this process better?
Wow, that indeed sounds like a very real challenge, and it shouldn't feel this complex. So let's walk you through what we have in store with Joule to make this easier for us. Instead of talking through what we have, we can now directly show you a demo of the meeting location planner agent in action. So now I'm logged into Joule, and you can see the Concur homepage, and I'm just launching Joule from the Concur homepage. And I start conversing with Joule, all in natural language. I provide Joule with some details, like I need to plan an offsite, the dates for my offsite, the number of people that are needed, and where they will be traveling from. Joule instantly proposes me the available SAP office locations because it knows where these employees are traveling from. Next, I want to preview the flight and the hotel costs. Once again, Joule presents me with the flight and hotel costs. In order to make an informed decision, I asked Joule to provide me with the all-in cost that combines both flight and hotel costs, and I see that now for each of my top locations shortlisted by Joule. After reviewing the flight costs, I decide to proceed with Miami. And just like that, I can ask Joule to generate an email summary that I can easily copy, paste, and circulate to all of the attendees that also has a link to the booking the flights directly. So effortlessly, travelers can simply use Joule to go and book their travel. And imagine this without the meeting location planner agent. Somebody needs to manually compare the flight costs, the hotel costs, all of the locations where travelers are going to be traveling from for those specific dates, and then find the optimal location. But with Meeting Location Planner Agent powered by Joule, you have all of that done for you and handled by Joule. So next, we've seen how Joule helps the executive assistant persona, someone that's orchestrating all of the complexity behind the scenes. But planning is only half the story, because ultimately, every trip is experienced by someone on the move who's juggling meetings, deadlines, and looking to achieve real business outcomes. So now my colleague is going to shift roles once again, this time as a business traveler.
Yes, so imagine your favorite galactic warrior as I go through this quote. I track bounties across star systems. I manage contracts and secure my credits. Booking travel should not feel like an added mission. What can Joule do to help me?
That's a very real challenge, because travel booking shouldn't feel like a project. It should feel effortless. Let me show you how Joule brings intelligence directly into the traveler's workflow. One of the biggest friction points in travel booking isn't the booking process itself. It's uncertainty. Uncertainty about policy, uncertainty about limits, uncertainty about what will get approved and what won't. And that's where Policy Navigator changes the game. Instead of searching through PDFs, instead of calling support, instead of taking a guess and fixing later, travelers can simply ask, can I expense alcohol with a client? What expenses require a receipt? Is baggage reimbursable? And Joule responds instantly with clear, contextual answers grounded in your company's policy. This is not generic guidance, and it's not AI improvisation. It's clear answers which is grounded in your company's specific policy. What this means in practice is powerful. Fewer policy violations and rejected expenses, less back and forth between employees and travel teams, and dramatically lower support overhead. This is where compliance stops feeling like enforcement and starts feeling like clarity. So now the traveler understands the policy. They know what's allowed and what isn't, and what's reimbursable. So the next step is simple. Just book the travel. And once again, Joule comes in, and this is where the Joule booking agent comes into play. Instead of navigating multiple screens, filters, and comparison pages, the travelers simply tells Joule what they need: their dates, location, and Joule responds with personalized and compliant recommendations for flights, hotels, and most recently, car rentals. What makes this powerful isn't just search, it's context. Joule already understands user preferences and your company's policies and configurations. So instead of searching first and fixing later, they're starting from options that already make sense. And it all happens through natural language right within the experience they're already in. And most importantly, Joule isn't just assisting the process, it acts. Once the traveler confirms, Joule completes the travel booking directly in the background. It moves from guidance to action. So we've seen how the booking agent works inside the traveler experience. But we also know something important about user behavior. Our users don't start their day in Concur. So we've designed our experience to meet users where they already work and to bring travel and expense to them. This is where the Joule plus Microsoft Copilot integration becomes important. Through this integration, all Joule capabilities, including the travel booking agent, are embedded directly within Microsoft 365 applications like PowerPoint. Imagine you're preparing a sales presentation for a customer meeting. While working on your deck, you realize you need to travel for this engagement. Instead of pausing, opening Concur, and re-entering details, you can launch Joule directly within the Copilot pane. Joule then surfaces compliant options and allows you to proceed with the travel booking. So this is not about redirecting users to another system. It's about embedding travel and expense capabilities into the workflows that they're already in. And this becomes even more powerful in communication scenarios. Take Outlook, for example. You receive an email asking you to attend a sales kickoff meeting. Through the Joule plus Copilot integration, you can directly launch the booking agent, view trip details, and compliant booking options, and book your travel all within Outlook. So once again, the user does not have to go to Joule. Joule comes to where the work is happening. So that's the shift on the booking side, from travel as a destination application to travel as an embedded capability across your workspace. But the journey doesn't end when the trip is booked. In many ways, that's when real work begins. So let's bring Haley back, this time not as someone planning or booking the trip, but as the traveler managing expenses.
All right. Back again, tracking fugitives across the galaxy, efficient. Navigating asteroid fields, manageable. Submitting travel expenses after a multi-system hunt, unnecessarily difficult. How can Joule make this process more efficient?
That's totally relatable, and I can imagine that. Haley's back from the trip, all the receipts are collected, the corporate transactions are flowing in, and now there's only one thing left to do, and the part that most travelers dread the most, which is finalizing the expenses. And this is where we are launching the new expense automation agent. The goal of the expense automation agent is simple: shift the user's role from creating the expense report to reviewing one. As soon as the trip is booked, the system automatically creates the expense report. All trip-related expenses, such as flights and agency fees, are intelligently grouped into the report at the time of booking. So when the user logs into Concur, the report is already in progress. There's no need to manually create a report, search for transactions, or start from a blank page. This reduces effort upfront and sets the foundation for a more streamlined experience throughout the trip. But automation isn't just about creating a report shell. It's about continuously managing and completing it in the background. During the trip, transactions flow in from the corporate card. Instead of requiring the user to manually match receipts and classify expenses, the agent extracts key details automatically. Details like vendor, date, amount, and location, and assigns the appropriate expense category. Receipts can be submitted through lightweight channels, such as responding to an SMS with a photo. There's no need to log in and manually fill out forms for each transaction. And the agent also distinguishes between travel-related and non-travel-related expenses. For example, recurring monthly charges are not incorrectly grouped into a travel report, even if they occur during the trip dates. And when it comes to custom fields, such as business purpose, the agent predicts and pre-populates values based on historical patterns and prior reports. These are typically the most time-consuming fields for users to complete. By the time the user opens the report, the majority of data entry work has already been done, and the user's task is no longer assembly, it's validation. And that's the real shift. And once the report is created, for added peace of mind, we can also use the expense report validation agent. As the name suggests, the expense report validation agent validates the report prior to submission to make sure that there are no outstanding alerts, warnings, or errors on your expense report, so it gets submitted and gets reimbursed in time. Let's look at a demo of the expense report validation agent in action. Once again, I'm logged into the Concur homepage, and I launch Joule from the homepage. In Joule, I'm going to ask to see my most recent expense reports that I want to submit. Once Joule presents me with the report option, I can choose Analyze with Joule, and this is the option that triggers the expense report validation agent. As I do that, Joule is now going to look through all of the expense items on the expense report and look for any missing, incomplete, or incorrect entries on the report. And it does that by looking for any outstanding alerts, warnings, or error messages, which normally are overwhelming for the user to go in and fix individually. Joule identifies that a request falls within the report date range and prompts me to add it. With just a click on the Add button within the Joule interface, I've now added it to my report. Next, I'm going to ask Joule to complete missing fields. These are fields where currently no value is populated on the report. Once again, Joule is going to scan all available expense items on the report and see if there are any fields that are missing values. After that, Joule is also going to present me with the desired value, in this case, the city of purchase. For each suggestion, I can review the confidence score as well as the reasoning. So as a user, I'm always in control for whether I want to accept a suggestion or not. And lastly, I'm going to ask Joule to check for any incorrect entries. So these are entries where there's already some value, but Joule predicts that these values are incorrect. In this case, Joule feels that the currency is incorrectly populated, and it prompts me to correct it. Once again, I can just confirm. I even have the option to edit the choice and then confirm it. After I review it, Joule also prompts me if there's any missing information, in this case, a missing receipt. so it directly navigates me into the expense item where I can choose the receipt and upload it into the expense item. After I save the expense and relaunch Joule, you'll notice that the context is still maintained. I can now review the updated report to see all of the updates and changes that are made on the report. Joule also presents me with the electronic user confirmation agreement. I can review it and submit the expense report all from within the Joule interface without having to navigate multiple screens and multiple scripts. So with this, I also know that Joule has validated my expense report and there are no outstanding errors, alerts, or warnings, and my report is compliant, gets submitted the first time, and gets reimbursed faster. With that, let's summarize what Joule has in store for the traveler during the on-trip as well as the post-trip journey. First of all, on-trip, Joule supports with expense automation. This is where the expense automation agent comes in. It pre-fills reports, learning from historical patterns and helping manage exceptions in context. Post-trip, it simplifies validation. This is where the expense report validation agent comes in. It guides with report completion, clarifying the policies in workflow, and running smart accuracy checks before submission. And importantly, all of these capabilities are not confined to one application. They extend into collaboration environments like Microsoft Teams and other Microsoft 365 applications, enabling booking, expense creation, and in-chat submissions directly where work is happening. Joule isn't just helping plan the travel. It's streamlining compliance and efficiency from meeting to expense end to end. Now that we've gone through the traveler journey, hopefully you've seen the value that Joule can provide. So let me bring Haley back to take us through the activation journey.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Malavika. Okay, so hopefully you are interested in moving forward and taking that next step with Joule, which is activation. So I'm going to give you a high-level introduction into that activation process, but I will highlight that there are links to an activation guide and FAQs that will have all of the details that you will need to go through this process. So I'll just give you the high-level taste of it, but when you're ready to start that journey, those resources are there for you. So activation is self-service, but I will highlight that it will require IT support. So step number one is to get your IT team on board and make sure that they are ready to support you through the activation process. In addition, just to be fully transparent and set expectations, don't be surprised if it takes more than 24 hours to activate the solution. It really depends on your specific company and your configuration settings, if you have other SAP solutions. So there's a lot of variables that might make it take longer or shorter for different clients. But I do want to just be upfront with that expectation that unfortunately, I wish I could just say click a button and it's on, but it does take a bit more effort than that. Okay, so I'll take you through the steps. Step number one would be going to the App Center and searching for Joule Base. And you will see a $0 SKU. Again, Joule Base is available at no additional cost. The second step is to provision in SAP Store. While you do that, you'll accept the AI terms and you'll generate an S-user ID. Then step number 3 is to configure the BTP environment. BTP is Business Technology Platform, and that is the technological foundation that Joule is built on. So if you already have a BTP account, you would link it, or otherwise you will be creating a BTP account at this point. The fourth step is enabling cloud identity services. So you're going to configure the IAS, which is the Identity Authentication Service, and IPS, Identity Provisioning Service. And this will provide user access. And then the final step is to run the Joule Booster. And this will take you through all of the final steps needed to complete that activation. Once these steps are completed, Joule will be live in your environment for all of your end users to use. And this will appear automatically in Concur solutions for them. They won't need a separate login, and there'll be very minimal UI changes. They'll just be able to activate that Joule chat window. So that was, the lesser exciting of our presentation, but important nonetheless. But now I would like to pass it back to Malavika to take us through the roadmap and vision. Malavika?
Yeah. So all of what we discussed and share with you in this session this far is things that are already available live in production, right? So these are not things that are coming soon, but things that are already live in production. Let's summarize what we have here in Joule Base. So in Joule Base, we have the conversational help search. We have the base expense transactions. We have the base travel use cases in the travel booking agent. And we have Policy Navigator, which is already live for our early adopter care customers and going to be generally available soon in Q2. As part of embedded Joule agents, we have our Expense-It agent called the Receipt Analysis agent that was launched in October last year. Again, it's already generally available for all our customers to use. In Joule Premium, we have the Meeting Location Planner agent and the Expense Report Validation agent, demos of both what we saw earlier in the session. And we have the Expense Automation agent that's coming soon for everyone to consume in Q2. Along with this, let's look at a broader AI and Joule roadmap for Concur. We'll see that a lot of action has just happened in the past quarter, and it continues to happen this quarter as we speak. In just Q4 2025, we launched the Joule Booking Agent, the Expense Report Validation Agent, the Receipt Analysis Agent, the Meeting Location Planner Agent, and Request Assistant. And in Q1, we enhanced some of those capabilities and added even more. Most importantly, the Microsoft Teams integration through Joule, the Joule and Microsoft Copilot integration, Policy Navigator, which is currently in EAC, and the Joule Booking Agent, which was earlier available with flight and hotel recommendations, got enhanced with car rentals as well. Next, in Q3, we're going to be adding more of these capabilities in Q2 before that. So we have the Joule Integrated Live Chat, AI-assisted configuration for audit rules, and this is a brand new capability we're introducing for our admin users, where you can use natural language to describe to AI what are the kind of audit rules you want configured, and AI will configure these rules for you in your system by looking at all of the conditions that need to be there, a name for the audit rule, and so on. And we also are launching the Expense Automation agent for everyone to use in Q2. Then in Q3, we're further enhancing it, the Joule Booking Agent with Rail and Joule Booking Agent for travel arrangers. This slide looks busy, but it also goes on to show the amount of investment that we are making in Joule and AI innovations at Concur. But mind you, this is not the full roadmap. We have the full roadmap linked on the slide, and you can always visit the SAP Roadmap Explorer to review the full roadmap of Concur and also all of the AI features and Joule features that we have planned for 2026 and beyond. With that, I hope you have an idea of what we have planned in store for you with the Joule vision and roadmap. And let me now hand it back to Haley to recap this session.
All right. So I hope that you all truly see that this isn't AI for the sake of AI, but it is here to drive true value. This is AI that anticipates your needs. We went through a lot of content today. We talked about the Meeting Location Planner agent that helps you coordinate group travel. We went through the Booking Agent to see how helps you book in policy travel. And we also talked about the Expense Automation agent and how it's going to complete expense reports for you, and much, much more. But ultimately, we hope that you see that this is all here to make your processes as automated, intelligent, and effortless as possible. Or, as a wise one might say, as automated, intelligent, and effortless as possible, your processes you must make. Before you watch the next session, we'd really appreciate your feedback, so please take a moment to fill out our survey. And thank you once again for taking the time out of your day to listen to our presentation. We hope you learned some new things, and please reach out if you have questions.